Imagine this, you're a killer. You've committed what you believe to be the perfect crime. No witnesses, no weapon, no evidence. You're confident. Cocky even. Days pass, then weeks. You watch the news with a cold smirk, knowing they're talking about you, and yet you feel untouchable. But what if, hidden in all your careful planning, there's one tiny thing, one overlooked detail you didn't catch? And what if that tiny thing, something as small as a single smudge, a casual word, or a forgotten habit, holds the power to destroy the entire illusion of your innocence? Tonight, we're going deep into the dark psyche of a criminal who thought he outsmarted everyone until that single, devastating clue shattered his overconfidence and changed everything. If you've ever wanted to know what makes a murderer tick, how detectives crack impossible cases, or how justice hides in the smallest shadows, this is the story you came here for. And I promise, you're going to get the answer you're searching for. Now, let's not pretend you stumbled on this video by accident. You clicked for a reason. Maybe it's because you love unraveling true crime mysteries. Maybe you're obsessed with those last-minute breakthroughs that leave your jaw on the floor. Or maybe, deep down, you're just like the rest of us. You need to understand how someone can commit such a dark act and still believe they'll never be caught. Whatever your reason, you're in the right place. Because what you're about to witness isn't just another murder story. It's a masterclass in psychological warfare. And you watching right now, are going to play the role of the detective. I'm going to walk you through this chilling tale, step by step, clue by clue, just like the investigators did. But I'm not going to give away everything up front. That would be too easy, and this case is anything but. Let me ask you something. Have you ever met someone who is so sure of themselves, so arrogant in their intelligence, that they believed they could get away with anything? Maybe it was someone in your life. A boss. A partner. A stranger. That same trait, that overconfidence, is what led our killer to believe he was unstoppable. He planned meticulously. He rehearsed. He cleaned. He even studied other crimes to make sure he wouldn't repeat their mistakes. But you know what he didn't plan for? Human error. And that's the thing most criminals forget. You can plan for everything except the things you don't see coming, the slip-ups, the forgotten habits, the unconscious tells that leave a trail of breadcrumbs straight back to you. And in this case, it was one of those tiny, almost invisible mistakes that cracked the case wide open. The scene begins in a quiet suburb just outside Chicago, a community where nothing really happens. You know the kind: tree-lined streets, neatly trimmed lawns, neighbors who wave good morning but don't really know each other. It's the kind of place where you'd never expect a cold-blooded killer to walk among you. But he did. And for a while, he did it flawlessly. He was charming. He was polite. The kind of guy who'd shovel his neighbor's driveway in the winter or offer to help carry groceries. No one suspected him, not even the people closest to the victim. And that's exactly how he wanted it. Because he knew how to play people. He understood how to manipulate emotions, how to blend in, how to be invisible when it mattered most. But what he didn't understand, what he couldn't control, was how his own ego would be the thing that betrayed him. Let's talk about the victim, because every case is one. And no, we won't sensationalize or exploit their tragedy, but you deserve to know who they were. Her name was Mia, 28, a schoolteacher, loved by her students, her friends, and the community. The kind of person who made everyone feel seen and safe. She was found in her home, lifeless, with no signs of forced entry, no signs of struggle. At first glance, it almost looked like natural causes. But to trained eyes, something was off. The way the room was staged. The eerie stillness that didn't match Mia's energy. The faint trace of something under her fingernails. And just like that, a peaceful community was cracked open, its surface charm revealing something dark and calculated beneath. The local police were stumped. There were no obvious suspects. No clear motive. And the killer? He watched it all unfold from a distance, amused. He believed he'd pulled off the ultimate vanishing act. But the thing about vanishing acts is that they require perfect precision, and his wasn't perfect. A detective named Erin McCall took the case. She was sharp, relentless, and not easily fooled. She had a reputation for catching killers who thought they were too smart to get caught. And when she looked at this crime scene, she saw something others didn't. Something microscopic. Something out of place. She didn't know it yet, but what she was about to uncover would flip the case upside down and lead her straight to the person who thought they were above suspicion. You're still here, right? Good. That means you're just as hooked as I was when I first read this case file. And trust me, it only gets more twisted from here. Because as we peel back the layers of this story, you're going to see just how deep the deception ran. This wasn't a random act. It wasn't spontaneous. It was personal. And the killer's confidence wasn't just an attitude. It was a mask hiding years of resentment, obsession, and manipulation. But don't worry, I won't make you wait long. I'm going to reveal everything. The clue, the unraveling, the confrontation. But only if you stick with me. Because this is the part where the story gets real. There's a reason this case has been trending on YouTube, on Reddit, on True Crime TikTok. The psychology behind it, the forensics, the twist no one saw coming. This is the kind of story that lives in your head long after the video ends. And as we dive into the mind of the killer, I'm going to challenge you. Watch closely. Pay attention to the details. Because by the time we reach the climax, you're going to feel like you were right there in that interrogation room, watching the truth unfold, moment by moment. But before we get there, before we uncover the damning piece of evidence that shattered everything, there's something you need to see. Something that rewrites the timeline in a way no one expected. Something that changes how you see the killer forever. So go ahead, lean in a little closer. Because what you're about to learn next might just make you question everything you thought you knew about this case. About justice. About guilt. And about the one thing every killer forgets. And it all starts with the clue he didn't even know he left behind. 2 of 2. Before we even get to the clue that cracks this case wide open, we need to understand the man behind the mask, because he wasn't just a killer. He was someone you could pass on the street and never think twice about. His name was Daniel Cole, 33 years old, clean-cut, well-spoken, with a job in tech and a solid presence in his community. He wasn't flashy, but he was liked, respected even. He coached a little league team. He attended neighborhood barbecues. He made people feel comfortable around him. But under that carefully constructed surface, there was something boiling. Something no one really saw until it was too late. And that's what makes this case so terrifying, because monsters like Daniel don't come out of the shadows with a scream. They smile. They offer to help. They shake your hand. In the weeks leading up to Mia's death, Daniel had started acting a little different. Nothing dramatic, just small shifts that only people close to him would notice. He was more distant at work. He missed a few community events he normally never skipped. His texts to friends started getting shorter, less enthusiastic, almost robotic. He even pulled back from coaching, claiming work was piling up. But here's the thing, no one pushed back. No one thought, something's wrong. Because Daniel had built up so much goodwill over the years that any odd behavior was instantly brushed off. Stress, burnout, life. It happens, right? And that's what makes these cases so complex. Because what looks like a mental spiral to an outsider is often camouflaged by the killer as everyday exhaustion. But let's talk about Mia and Daniel. Because yes, they knew each other. That part isn't in question. What is still murky is the nature of their relationship. Some people say they were close friends. Others insist there was something more, something romantic that had gone sour. Daniel, of course, would later claim they were just acquaintances, neighbors who crossed paths from time to time. Nothing serious. But their text history told a very different story. Dozens of messages. Late-night conversations. Shared playlists. Inside jokes. And then, abruptly, silence. That silence started about 3 weeks before Mia's death. No explanation. No goodbye. Just nothing. It was like someone slammed the door shut. And that silence is one of the earliest indicators that something deeply personal was going on behind closed doors. Now, this is where the case starts to get slippery. Because Daniel wasn't the only person in Mia's life with complicated feelings. A former boyfriend, Tyler Maddox, had a history with her that was anything but smooth. Tyler had a reputation for being hot-headed. jealous. The kind of guy who didn't take rejection well. He and Mia had broken up nearly a year before her death, but people in her circle said he never really let go. He'd show up unannounced, send cryptic messages. Nothing criminal, but enough to raise eyebrows. So, naturally, when the investigation began, Tyler was the first person everyone looked at. He even had a shaky alibi for the night Mia died. He claimed he was out with friends, but no one could confirm it exactly. For a while, he was the prime suspect, and honestly, he should have been. But here's where the story twists again. While investigators were combing through Tyler's background, trying to connect that didn't quite line up, Detective Aaron McCall kept circling back to one thing: Daniel's calm. His composure. Most people, even innocent ones, crack under pressure, if not emotionally, then in how they talk, how they move, how they breathe. But Daniel? He was smooth. Too smooth. When questioned about Mia, he never stumbled, never got defensive. And yet, the way he controlled his emotions didn't feel like a sign of innocence. It felt like someone rehearsing. Someone who'd already played this scene in his head 1,000 times. Erin's instincts told her something was off. But instincts aren't evidence, and without any physical proof linking him to the crime scene, she couldn't push harder. Not yet. But the more she dug, the more inconsistencies started showing up in Daniel's story. His timeline was tight. Too tight. His phone data showed a 2-hour window where he went offline. No calls, no texts, no activity. He said he was out for a run, but his fitness tracker hadn't logged any steps. That in itself wasn't damning, but it was enough to keep Erin looking. Meanwhile, neighbors started coming forward, adding noise to an already crowded case. One swore they saw a man in a hoodie near Mia's house that night, pacing. Another said they heard raised voices, but they couldn't make out the words. And just like that, the red herrings started to pile up. Was the man in the hoodie Daniel? Or was it Tyler? Or could it have been someone else entirely, someone no one even knew about? One of Mia's coworkers mentioned she'd been upset the week before her death, that she was worried about someone following her. But she never said who. Another friend recalled Mia saying, "He won't stop watching me." But again, no name. No context. Just vague fears and fragmented warnings. These weren't enough to point fingers, but they were enough to build pressure. Everyone close to Mia had some shadow cast over them. And that's exactly how Daniel wanted it. Because while the cops were chasing Tyler, chasing shadows, Daniel stayed right where he was, quiet, calm, invisible. The turning point came when Mia's laptop was recovered. It had been scrubbed, wiped clean, almost professionally. But digital forensics is a stubborn science, and even the best cleanup jobs leave a trail. Hidden deep in the metadata was a single, corrupted audio file. It was short, less than 20 seconds, mostly static. But at the tail end, a voice came through, barely audible, distorted by panic. Just a name. A whisper. And when the team isolated it, enhanced it, ran it through voice recognition, what they heard chilled them. Because it wasn't Tyler's name. It wasn't someone random. It was Daniel. Just that. Daniel. Nothing else. But said with fear. With urgency. And it flipped the entire investigation. Now, I know what you're thinking. Why not arrest him right then and there? But in cases like these, one whisper isn't enough to make a case airtight. Especially when the suspect is meticulous. Erin knew she had to move carefully. That Daniel would know the walls were closing in the second he sensed pressure. So she did what only the best detectives do. She let him believe he was still in control. She let him feel like he was winning. Meanwhile, she dug deeper. Interviewed people Daniel hadn't talked to in years. Went through receipts, surveillance, deleted emails, anything that could turn a whisper into a scream. And somewhere in that mountain of data, buried beneath the ordinary, was the one clue, the one oversight, that Daniel never even realized he'd left behind. But before I tell you what it is, you need to understand one more thing. Because there's a twist in this story that even the detectives didn't see coming. And once it came to light, it didn't just change the direction of the investigation. It changed everything they thought they knew about Daniel Cole, Mia, and the real motive behind the murder. So stay with me. Because we're about to cross the line from what's logical into what's chillingly personal. And that one clue? It's not just evidence. It's a secret Daniel never wanted the world to find out. Just when Detective Erin McCall thought she was closing in, the case began slipping through her fingers. The audio file, Mia's last whisper of Daniel, was enough to reignite the investigation, but the victory was short-lived. Less than 48 hours after it was discovered, the file mysteriously disappeared from the department's evidence server. One minute it was there, cataloged, time-stamped, verified, and the next it was gone. No deletion log, no trace of who accessed it. Erin was furious. She knew it wasn't a glitch. It was deliberate. Someone inside the department had tampered with evidence. And in that moment, everything changed. She wasn't just dealing with a calculated killer anymore. She was dealing with someone who had the power to cover his tracks, and maybe even influence the people meant to stop him. But who would risk everything to protect Daniel Cole? That question haunted Erin. She retraced every connection. Who had access to the case files? Who had a reason to erase that audio? The deeper she looked, the more unsettling it got. Because Daniel wasn't just some random loner. He had deep roots in the community, and one of those roots led straight to a high-ranking officer in the precinct. Captain Ross Merrick, a decorated veteran of the force. Respected, untouchable, and, she discovered through old photos, Daniel's godfather. Erin's heart dropped when she saw the picture. Daniel, barely 10, standing beside Merrick at a backyard barbecue, both smiling, like family. Suddenly, the missed calls, the redacted files, the untraceable server access, they all started to make a sick kind of sense. But even with her gut screaming betrayal, Erin couldn't make an official move. Not without proof. Not without risking her entire career. Meanwhile, pressure from the outside was building. Mia's murder was starting to make headlines again. Young woman's mysterious death remains unsolved. Is her killer hiding in plain sight? Flooded YouTube's trending crime searches. TikTok sleuths were dissecting every frame of body cam footage. Podcast hosts were spinning their own theories, and true crime fans on Reddit were tearing the investigation apart. But with the renewed attention came an unexpected consequence. Erin started receiving anonymous messages. At first, they seemed harmless. Just vague emails telling her to move on, or let it go. But they got darker. Personal. They referenced her daughter's school. Her private appointments. Someone wasn't just warning her. They were watching her. Still, Erin kept pushing. And that's when she found something no one expected. An old journal. Mia's. Buried in a cardboard box her parents had nearly thrown away. Most of it was filled with doodles and college stress rants, but wedged between the pages was something different. A letter. Unsent. Addressed to someone named A. It was raw, emotional, and heartbreaking. In it, Mia described feeling trapped, like someone close to her had control over her life. She wrote, "He says he'll ruin me if I speak. That no one will believe me. And maybe he's right.
He knows things about my past.
Things I've never told anyone. If anything happens to me, it wasn't an accident." The letter was dated 3 months before her death. Erin had no idea who A was. A former boyfriend? A family friend? A secret accomplice? Every possibility was a new rabbit hole. But the letter also hinted at something else, something no one in the investigation had uncovered until now. A secret from Mia's past. Something she was ashamed of. Something someone was using to manipulate her. And if Erin could figure out what it was, she might finally understand why Mia was killed. But the closer she got to the truth, the more tangled the web became. Surveillance footage that should have shown Daniel near Mia's house was corrupted. A neighbor who previously claimed to see him pacing that night suddenly recanted. "I must have been mistaken," she said flatly, eyes darting to the detective behind Erin as she spoke. Even the coroner's office called to say a piece of evidence, Mia's clothing, had been accidentally discarded. Too many coincidences. Too many convenient errors. Erin realized what she was up against wasn't just one man. It was a wall of silence, a network of loyalty and fear, stretching back decades. Then, one night, Erin received a package at her doorstep. No return address. Inside was a flash drive. She hesitated before plugging it into a secured laptop. What she found left her cold. It was security camera footage, grainy, low resolution, but clear enough to make out the figures. It was from a gas station near the crime scene, time-stamped the night of Mia's murder. Daniel was there, but he wasn't alone. A woman was with him. She was arguing with him, visibly upset. Aaron recognized her immediately. It was Officer Natalie Greer. Her partner. The one who had been with her from the beginning of the case. The one she trusted. Why was Natalie with Daniel that night? Why hadn't she mentioned it? Why was she yelling at him? And most of all, what was she hiding? Aaron's world tilted. She didn't know who to trust. Every answer led to more questions. And as the walls closed in, one thing became painfully clear. This wasn't just about justice anymore. It was personal. Someone was playing a long game. And Aaron was running out of time to find the truth before it disappeared for good. Because the flash drive had one more file. A voice recording. And the last words on it? Don't trust her. You said. Aaron froze at her desk, staring at the waveform on the screen, listening again to the distorted voice whispering. Don't trust her. It was robotic, altered, clearly an attempt to mask the speaker's identity, but something about the cadence felt familiar, like a phantom memory she couldn't quite place. It wasn't just the message itself that sent chills down her spine. It was the timing. Why now? Why reveal this when the investigation was already unraveling at the seams? She immediately confronted Officer Natalie Greer, demanding answers, but Natalie's reaction wasn't what Aaron expected. She didn't deny being near the gas station. In fact, she looked like she'd been waiting for this moment, ready with an explanation that felt too polished, too rehearsed. She claimed she'd been following a lead on her own, one she didn't want to report until she had more proof. According to her, Daniel had been meeting with someone he referred to as the cleaner, someone who makes problems disappear. Natalie said she thought she was protecting Aaron by keeping it quiet. But if that were true, why wasn't it in the report? Why didn't she come clean earlier, especially after the file went missing? Before Aaron could press further, another curveball hit, this time from someone she hadn't heard from in years, her ex-husband, Jason. A former investigative journalist turned private fixer, Jason had always been good at getting into places he shouldn't. Out of the blue, he called her, voice low and urgent. Aaron, we need to talk. I think Mia's case is connected to something else I've been working on, he said. He explained that several months ago, he was hired anonymously to investigate a college professor who was allegedly running an underground group, one that manipulated vulnerable students using blackmail and psychological coercion. The name at the center of that group? Professor Adrian Locke, the same man who once mentored Daniel Cole at university. Jason didn't have hard proof yet, but he'd found enough whispers and fragments, student forums, deleted texts, heavily redacted campus reports, that pointed to something dark and organized. And Mia, it turned out, had taken one of Professor Locke's advanced seminars just months before her death. Jason believed she had uncovered something she wasn't supposed to know, something that made her a threat. But that wasn't all. He said he'd received an anonymous envelope the day before, slipped under his office door. Inside was a single photo of his daughter, Aaron's daughter, walking home from school. No note, just the image. The message was clear. Stop digging, or your child becomes collateral. Now, Aaron wasn't just fighting for justice. She was fighting to protect her own family. But still, she couldn't walk away. That wasn't in her DNA. So she leaned harder into the investigation, chasing down every new lead Jason could offer, every email Mia had ever sent to classmates, every trace of Daniel's college years. That's when she found something buried deep in Mia's laptop backups, a cache of screenshots from a private group chat labeled Project Eden. The messages were chilling, cold, calculating conversations about compliance models, emotional leverage, and emergency resets. And then one message stood out from the rest. It read, "M's starting to crack. Might need to pull the plug. I'll handle it.
D."
Aaron didn't want to believe it, but there it was, Daniel referencing Mia directly, speaking in code, but without question pointing toward a decision that felt final. Like a death sentence. As she dug further, Aaron began to wonder if Daniel was really the mastermind or just another puppet in someone else's hands. Because now even Professor Locke was missing. His house was abandoned, his office cleaned out, no digital trail of any recent activity. And Natalie? She started acting even more strangely, avoiding eye contact, taking calls in private, getting visibly agitated when Aaron asked about past arrests or files she supposedly turned over. Aaron set up a small camera in her office without telling anyone. That night, she caught Natalie copying files from Aaron's personal drive onto a flash stick, then deleting her browser history. When Aaron confronted her the next day, Natalie claimed it was a misunderstanding, that she was backing up the case in case someone else tried to erase it. But Aaron wasn't buying it anymore. Every person around her was starting to look like a suspect. And then, just as the pieces started to realign in her head, the story twisted again. A new body was found. Same MO, same signature. Same eerie precision. But this time, it wasn't someone connected to Mia. It was a man named Darren Holt, a former IT director at the university where Daniel studied. And on his desk was a sticky note with 3 words written in capital letters: "Stop her now." Aaron stared at the note, heart pounding. Was she the target now? Was she getting too close? Or worse, was someone framing her? Because the moment that new victim showed up, Aaron's entire timeline of events, her version of the truth, started to crumble. Daniel had an airtight alibi for the time of Darren's death, which meant someone else had picked up where he left off. Or maybe they were always the one pulling the strings. The truth was no longer just a mystery to be solved. It was a minefield, with every step bringing her closer to something more dangerous than she ever imagined. Because Aaron wasn't sure anymore if she was the hunter or if she was the one being hunted. It was just past 2 a.m. when Aaron jolted awake, drenched in sweat, heart racing like she had run a marathon. It wasn't a dream that woke her. It was the sense that something was wrong, something deeply off in the atmosphere. Her house was silent, save for the low hum of the refrigerator, but a cold draft snaked its way under her bedroom door, and she could swear the hallway light, normally turned off, was glowing faintly. She crept out of bed, gripping the handgun she kept in her nightstand, and moved slowly through the house, trying to steady her breath. The front door was locked, the windows secure, but when she reached the living room, her blood ran cold. Someone had been there. A single photo sat on the coffee table, perfectly centered. It was a printout of her and her daughter from a school fundraiser, one that had never been shared publicly. On the back, in thick black Sharpie, were the words, "You're next. Stay quiet." Erin's hands trembled as she reached for her phone, but there was no signal. Her Wi-Fi was dead, and so was the landline. Someone had cut her connection to the outside world. Her first instinct was to check on her daughter. She raced up the stairs, threw open the bedroom door, and let out a shaky breath when she saw the girl sleeping peacefully, unaware of the storm brewing around her. Erin didn't sleep the rest of that night. She sat in the hallway with her back to the door, gun in hand, eyes locked on every shadow and flicker of light that moved across the walls. The fear wasn't just that someone had broken in, it was that they had done it without being seen, without leaving a trace, and without hurting anyone yet. That level of control, of precision, was terrifying. It meant she wasn't dealing with a desperate killer. She was dealing with someone who planned everything, someone who wanted her to know they were close. Watching. Waiting. By morning, Erin tried to report the break-in, but even that turned strange. The officer who showed up seemed more interested in asking her why she didn't have a working security system than actually documenting the evidence. He didn't take the photo, didn't dust for prints, didn't even log the incident. He just scribbled a few notes and left. And Erin knew, deep down in her gut, that he'd been sent not to help, but to observe, to gauge how shaken she was. That was when the paranoia really began to sink in. She started questioning everything. Every face in the precinct, every passerby on her morning jog, every wrong number call that lasted a beat too long before hanging up. Was her phone being tapped? Was her car bugged? Had Natalie lied to more people than just her? Every time Erin looked over her shoulder, she wondered if she was being followed, and soon, even familiar places started to feel like traps. Then, in the middle of all this chaos, Jason went silent. For 3 days, no texts, no calls. His office line rang endlessly. When she finally drove out to his apartment, she found the front door wide open, lights on, but not a single sign of him inside. His laptop was gone. The drawers had been rifled through. But oddly, nothing valuable was stolen. Erin's stomach twisted when she found the same sticky note on his kitchen counter that had been at the second crime scene. Stop her now. Only this time, below the words was something new, a blood-stained thumbprint. And it wasn't Jason's. Forensics later confirmed it didn't match any known profiles in their system. Whoever left it wasn't in any database. They didn't exist, not on paper, not online, nowhere. The stakes had shifted completely. Jason, the only person who had answers she couldn't get from anyone else, had either gone underground or been taken. Either way, he wasn't coming back anytime soon. And Erin was left with more questions than she knew what to do with. What had Jason really found about Professor Locke's secret group? Was this Project Eden just some elaborate psychological operation, or was it connected to something deeper, something possibly rooted in institutional corruption? Mia's death no longer felt like an isolated incident. It felt like a small piece of a puzzle that stretched far beyond their town, their jurisdiction, maybe even beyond the law itself. Erin became a ghost in her own life. She started parking her car blocks away from her house. She stopped using her credit cards. She communicated only through burner phones and encrypted messages. Her daughter stayed with a trusted friend in another county, one of the few people she still believed was clean. But even then, the nightmares wouldn't stop. Not just dreams of violence, but of confusion, of twisted timelines and shifting identities. People she thought she knew would morph in her dreams, voices she trusted turning against her. The video was only 12 seconds long. It showed Mia, wide-eyed and visibly terrified, whispering something to someone off-camera. Her voice was trembling, barely audible, but when Erin boosted the volume and filtered the background noise, she heard it, clear as day. He said, "I'll disappear like the others." He said, "No one will believe me." He said, "It's already started." One evening, as she sat in a hidden corner of a public library, combing through Mia's remaining files on an old, untraceable laptop, she found something that shouldn't have existed. A video file, timestamped the day before Mia's death, with no metadata, no upload trail. It had simply appeared in a backup drive. It was starting to feel like psychological warfare. Every memory, every connection, every truth she held onto was being slowly eroded. And worst of all, she had no idea how far the rot spread. Erin sat frozen, staring at the screen, heart pounding in her ears. The others. That one phrase unraveled everything. How many others? How many deaths had been disguised, rewritten, or ignored entirely? And more importantly, who was he? Before Erin could process it, the screen glitched. The file was suddenly corrupted. Then her laptop crashed completely. When she tried to restart it, the hard drive was wiped clean. Every file gone. Just like Jason. Just like the truth. And in the reflection of the dark laptop screen, Erin saw something behind her. A shadow. Moving. Watching. And just like that, the game changed again. Just when Erin thought she had hit the bottom of the rabbit hole, the ground beneath her gave way entirely. It happened on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, the kind of day that made everything feel heavier. Sky gray, streets soaked, and her thoughts even darker. She had arranged to meet with one of Mia's former students, a quiet but sharp kid named Danny who had reached out with a cryptic email. I know what she was working on. Meet me in person. I don't trust phones. Erin, desperate for any thread to pull, agreed. They met at an old diner on the edge of town, the kind that still had a jukebox in the corner and smelled like burnt coffee and old vinyl booths. Danny looked jumpy, twitching at every movement outside the window, but he finally leaned in and slid something across the table, a flash drive, wrapped in duct tape, labeled with one word, lock. She hesitated, unsure what to expect. But when she opened the file later that night, she wasn't prepared for what she found. It wasn't a document or a video or even a voice memo. It was a collection of high-resolution scans, pages from an old, handwritten journal. It took her a moment to realize whose journal it was. The writing was distinct, the tone cold and academic, but the name signed on the first page shattered her understanding of everything. Detective Erin Granger. Her own name. Her own handwriting. But she had never written these pages in her life. And the content? It described events in detail, conversations, case notes, locations that hadn't happened yet, including Jason's disappearance, including the blood-stained thumbprint, including the very diner where she'd just met Danny. For a few minutes, Erin sat in stunned silence, heart hammering against her ribs. Her thoughts ran wild. Was someone messing with her? Was this some kind of planted file? A psychological attack? But as she flipped through the pages, one entry stopped her cold. It was dated 2 weeks in the future. It detailed a confrontation she hadn't yet had, with someone she trusted deeply. A betrayal, one that would upend everything. Still reeling from the journal, she confronted the only person she believed was still loyal to her. Officer Lila Cortez, her closest friend on the force. Lila had been the one who stayed behind when others turned away. She had helped Erin with backdoor searches, protected her daughter during those tense early weeks, even driven across state lines to retrieve files from Mia's former colleagues. But when Erin showed her the journal, Lila didn't react with confusion or denial. She simply exhaled, long and slow, like she had been waiting for this moment. "I told them you'd find it," Lila said softly, not meeting her eyes. Erin's chest tightened. "Told who?" Lila finally looked up, and the sadness in her eyes was more terrifying than rage. "The ones behind all this. Project Eden. Mia wasn't supposed to find out. Neither were you. But I tried to shield you, Erin. I really did." Erin stepped back like she'd been punched. Her voice cracked. "You were helping me." "I was," Lila said, "but not the way you thought. I was keeping you on the path. Steering you just close enough to the truth to feel like you were winning, but never close enough to expose it. I didn't want it to end like this." Erin's mind reeled. Every conversation, every tip, every moment of trust, it had all been calculated. Lila had been playing both sides. The betrayal was worse than anything she could have imagined. But even through the storm of anger and confusion, one thing stood out. The journal. If it was real, if it truly predicted events before they happened, then someone somewhere had been watching this play out long before Erin ever got involved. And that meant this wasn't just a murder investigation. It was a script, a controlled narrative. Suddenly, the phrase from the bloodstained note made terrifying sense. "Stop her now." Erin hadn't stumbled into this. She had been placed here, chosen, monitored, and maybe manipulated. As Lila stood to leave, she handed Erin a small key, nothing more than a rusted storage unit tag from a place on the outskirts of town. "You'll find the rest there. If you go, it's all on you now." Then she was gone. Just like Jason, just like Mia. And Erin was left with more questions than ever. Why her? Why this case? And most disturbingly, who had written that journal in her handwriting? The deeper she went, the more it felt like she wasn't solving a mystery. She was the mystery. "You said." The next morning felt like waking up inside a storm. Erin hadn't slept, not really. Her body had shut down from exhaustion around 5 a.m., only for her to jolt awake an hour later, heart pounding as if she'd been running for her life. Lila's betrayal haunted her, not just because of the lies, but because deep down, she had known something wasn't right. She had ignored her instincts. That guilt sat heavy on her chest, choking her like a weighted blanket. But there was no time to dwell on regrets. The key Lila had given her burned in her pocket like it carried a curse. She knew going to that storage unit could unravel everything or destroy what little she had left to hold on to. Still, the need to understand was greater than her fear. She had already lost too much not to see this through. The storage unit sat at the edge of town, surrounded by rusted fencing and rows of aging, padlocked doors. It was the kind of place people rented to store forgotten furniture, old tax documents, or broken pieces of a past life. But this unit, Number 112 was different. Inside, Aaron found a single metal shelf, a dusty file cabinet, and a stack of black binders marked only with dates and strange code names. There were surveillance photos, redacted documents, transcripts of private conversations, some of which were hers. Phone calls, emails, therapy sessions. Things no one should have had access to. She stood frozen, flipping through pages that documented her life, like she was a lab subject. Every decision she had made since taking on Mia's case was detailed here, including the moment she'd met Jason for the first time, long before she remembered it happening. The binders made one thing chillingly clear. Her involvement in this mystery hadn't been a coincidence. It had been orchestrated from the start. And then came the real bombshell. In one of the drawers, sealed in a yellow envelope, was a signed letter. Not just from Lila, but from Aaron's own partner, Detective Aaron Cole. Her rock. Her confidant. The one person who had stood beside her from the beginning, back when everything still felt like just a strange murder case. The letter was addressed to Project Lead, Eden Clearance only. It was a debrief. A full report of Aaron's movements, her reactions, even her emotional responses.
Cold. Clinical.
Methodical. She couldn't believe what she was reading. Aaron, the man who had helped her bury her mother, the one who had protected her daughter during those first terrifying weeks, had been feeding her into the machine the whole time. The betrayal wasn't just tactical, it was deeply personal. Shaking and sick to her stomach, Aaron drove straight to the precinct, stormed past stunned officers, and into Aaron's office. He was there, seated calmly behind his desk, as if he had been waiting for this moment too. He didn't even flinch when she threw the envelope at him. His expression was unreadable. For a moment, he said nothing, just stared at the papers like they were old news. And then he said something that made Aaron feel like the air had been ripped out of the room. "You were never supposed to open that storage unit." She wanted to scream, to tear the walls down around them, but instead she choked out the question that had been eating at her from the start. "Why me?" Aaron leaned forward, his voice low and terrifyingly calm. "Because you're the only one who could lead them to it. The real target isn't the killer. It's what the killer found before anyone else. Something buried. Something that was supposed to stay hidden. Mia got too close. You picked up the trail. The only way to control it was to let you believe you were uncovering it." Aaron's knees nearly buckled. "So everything, Mia, Jason, even Lila, it was all part of this plan?" "No," he said, and there was a flash of something almost human in his eyes. "They made their own choices. Just like you're going to have to now." He stood, walked over to the window, and pulled down the blinds. "Here's the truth, Aaron. You've seen too much. You have two choices. You walk away. Forget all of it. Take your daughter and disappear. We'll make sure you never hear about this again. Or you keep going. And if you do, you need to understand, there's no coming back from what you'll find." The room was silent. Time seemed to stretch out endlessly. Erin's throat was dry, her pulse thudding like a warning. Everything inside her screamed that she should walk away. Take the exit. Protect her child. Live to see another day. But the look on Erin's face, the resignation, the hollow conviction, told her what she needed to know. If she turned back now, it wouldn't stop. The people behind this wouldn't disappear. They'd just find another pawn. Another life to ruin. Another mystery to bury.
She didn't respond.
She simply turned and walked out of the room, the weight of 1,000 questions pressing down on her like a vice. Outside the precinct, rain had started falling again, soaking the pavement, washing away the day's heat, but it did nothing to cool the fire now burning in her chest. Because Erin wasn't just caught in a conspiracy. She was the key to it. And somewhere, buried in the chaos and deception, the truth was still out there, waiting to be found. But now she knew something she hadn't before. The real enemy wasn't just the killer. It was the system that had allowed it all to happen. And it was far from finished with her. The city didn't sleep anymore. Not for Erin.
Not now.
The glow of streetlights felt colder, buildings taller and more menacing, and the silence that used to bring comfort had twisted into a suffocating hush, like the world was holding its breath around her. Every shadow looked like a tail. Every unmarked van parked a little too long felt like it was watching her. The conspiracy she thought was confined to a few rogue officers and corrupt files had ballooned into something colossal, far more sinister, more calculating than she ever could have imagined. And the deeper she dug, the more she realized this wasn't just about Mia. It wasn't even just about her. This was a machine that had swallowed entire lives. Erased them. Rewritten history in digital ink. It started unraveling when Erin broke into the off-site Federal Archives facility in Brighton under cover of night, something she never thought she'd be desperate enough to do. With help from a retired analyst she'd once saved from a trafficking sting, she accessed encrypted files that had been deliberately removed from public record. Inside them, she discovered what Project Eden really was, not just a psychological manipulation program, but an elaborate behavioral engineering system disguised as criminal investigations. Every person drawn into its web had been carefully selected, monitored, and triggered by a sequence of traumatic events, all designed to study decision-making under extreme emotional stress. Victims, suspects, even law enforcement operatives. Everyone played a role. Everyone was a subject. She found Mia's name, Jason's, hers, even Lila's. And then, buried near the bottom of a redacted log labeled Field Control, Tier 1, she saw a name she hadn't expected. Her daughter, Lexi. Erin's throat locked. Her hands trembled so badly she had to steady them against the terminal. Her daughter had been logged as a potential generational subject. They had been watching her too. The nightmares. The panic attacks. The obsessive questions about Mia. It wasn't coincidence. Lexi had been pulled into the current, quietly, cruelly, like prey in the undertow of a monster Erin never saw coming. While no one noticed, she barely made it back to the safe house before collapsing to the floor, sobbing so violently she thought she might pass out. The feeling of betrayal, of absolute helplessness, carved into her deeper than any physical wound ever could. But there was no time to break. No space to grieve. They were running out of time, and Erin needed to protect her daughter more than ever. She packed a go-bag, grabbed the burner phone she kept hidden in a hollowed-out textbook, and made arrangements for Lexi to be taken out of the country with her aunt, under a fake identity. It was the only way. But just as she was walking Lexi to the car, she saw someone watching from across the street. Not a stranger. Erin. He didn't run. He didn't hide. He just stood there, the same empty calm on his face as the day he gave her that ultimatum. And for the first time, Erin didn't hesitate. She confronted him head-on, rage radiating from every step. "Is Lexi just another line in your experiment?" she demanded, eyes burning. Erin's expression didn't shift. "She was never meant to be part of this. But you made choices. They triggered events. You were warned." Erin could barely control herself. "I will expose all of it. Every file, every name, every child you've manipulated. I swear to God." "You won't make it that far," he interrupted, tone flat, almost pitying. "You've already been flagged. Every step you take now is monitored. The next mistake you make, it's over." The words hit like a bullet, but the real shock wasn't in what he said. It was what she saw behind him. A woman, watching from the shadows. Lila. Not dead. Not missing.
Alive.
She stepped forward slowly, no longer hiding. No longer pretending. Her eyes met Erin's, and something unreadable passed between them. Regret. Pain. Something darker. "I told you not to go to that unit," Lila said softly. "You weren't ready." Erin felt her stomach twist. "You were working with them the whole time." Lila looked away, guilt seeping into her voice. "At first. But it got out of hand. The project evolved. We all thought we could control it, but it's bigger than us now. They're calling it the final phase." "What does that mean?" Erin asked, heart pounding like a drum. "They're not studying us anymore," Lila said, her voice barely a whisper. "They're starting to use us." And just like that, Erin understood the true scale of the danger. This wasn't a case. This wasn't justice. It was a carefully crafted performance, a live experiment, with real people as puppets in the hands of something massive and invisible. The deeper she went, the less control she had. And now, it wasn't just her life on the line. It was her daughter's.
Her past.
The truth itself. She turned away from them, grabbed Lexi's hand, and got into the car, her mind racing with a single, terrifying question. If she had been manipulated from the very start, what parts of her were even real anymore? And worse, was there anyone left she could trust? It all came down to one room, a cold, windowless command center buried beneath a decommissioned government facility outside Langley. Erin had followed a trail of encrypted files, burner phones, and whispered names all the way to this place, dodging every warning, every threat, every betrayal along the way. She was bruised, emotionally frayed, and constantly looking over her shoulder. But now, as she slipped past a final layer of biometric security with a stolen fingerprint and a cracked passcode embedded in a forgotten journal, she knew she was seconds from the truth. Everything that had haunted her since Mia vanished, every manipulated clue, every redacted file, every ghost in her past, was about to be laid bare. The hum of machines echoed softly, casting shifting blue lights on the concrete walls. Screens flickered with live data feeds, surveillance from streets she once walked, voice transcriptions of private calls she hadn't realized were monitored, psychological profiles that had reduced human lives to cold, clinical metrics. And then she saw it. The dossier. A full operational summary marked with her name, time-stamped with the day she first received the anonymous text about Mia. Subject ER-47, reactivity pattern test, phase completion imminent. Her whole life since then, every decision she thought she made, every choice that led her here, had been orchestrated. But the worst part wasn't her own manipulation. It was what they'd done to Lexi. Her daughter's name was logged repeatedly under a subprogram called Generational Compliance Modeling. They weren't just using trauma to test subjects, they were planting it in families like seeds. Before she could even process the horror, the voice that haunted her stepped out of the shadows. Erin. Still polished.
Still calm.
Still pretending to be the rational scientist amidst chaos. But this time, there was no mask left to hide behind. "You made it," he said with a quiet satisfaction, as if welcoming her to some elite club she never asked to join. "We weren't sure you would." Erin's voice cracked, rage bubbling under every word. "You used my daughter. You broke people. You murdered them and called it research." Erin raised his hand dismissively. This wasn't about murder. It was about progress. Human psychology under real pressure. The decisions people make when everything's at stake. That's the rawest data you can get. "You built a lie," she spat. "And now I'm going to burn it all down." But Erin only smiled. "You still think you're outside of it. That you're a hero in a story we didn't write. But Erin, you were always part of the program. From the beginning." She froze. "You don't remember, do you?" he said, stepping toward the main console. "Your intake interview? The trauma screening? You were 15 when you signed the waiver.
You thought it was a summer program.
You told us your father was abusive. We knew then. We had our subject." Her chest collapsed in on itself. Memories began to churn. Flashes of sterile hallways. White walls. A woman with a clipboard asking how she felt about fear. She staggered backward. "That's not possible. It was always you." Mia was just the trigger. In a split-second blur of anguish and fury, Erin drew the hidden firearm from her belt and pointed it at Erin's chest. But before she could pull the trigger, the monitors behind him changed. A new video feed came online. Lexi, sitting in a room that looked eerily like Erin's childhood facility, being asked the same questions. "Do you ever feel like you're not in control of your choices?" a voice asked. Erin's hand shook violently. "You pull that trigger," Erin said softly, "and the program continues. She becomes the next primary subject. Her path is set." Tears spilled freely down Erin's face. Her whole life, she'd fought to protect her daughter from the very darkness she now realized she'd unknowingly helped create. But Erin was right about one thing. She had a choice now. A real one. And she wasn't about to let them write Lexi's ending too. She didn't shoot. Instead, she dropped the weapon, turned to the nearest console, and jammed the emergency data purge protocol she'd memorized on her way in. Alarms screamed instantly. Lights turned red. Security systems began to lock down. Aaron lunged at her, but she was faster. She slammed him into the wall with everything she had, years of fury propelling her like a hurricane. He hit the concrete and collapsed, gasping, as the entire database began erasing itself piece by piece. Test files, profiles, surveillance logs.
Gone.
But just before the system wiped clean, one final screen flashed. Subject ER-47. Termination failed. Phase 3 activated. And then the power cut. Outside, as Erin emerged into the first sunlight she'd seen in days, she clutched the only physical copy of the data she salvaged in her backpack and made one silent vow: to expose everything. But the message on the screen haunted her. Phase 3. Back in the facility, unseen in the shadows, a second figure stepped out. Watching her leave, smiling faintly, Lila. She turned to a secondary panel and activated a backup system Erin never found. Because the real test wasn't whether Erin would uncover the truth, it was what she'd do once she did. Weeks passed since the facility burned from the inside out, swallowed in an accidental fire that local authorities would never question too deeply, thanks to the anonymous donor that funneled hush money into their accounts. On paper, the program ceased to exist, its name scrubbed from government databases, its agents reassigned, retired, or in some cases, quietly silenced. But in Erin's world, the echoes never truly faded. Every time her phone buzzed, every car that lingered too long behind her, every creak in her house at night still sent a chill through her bones. Yet amid all that, something changed. Lexi was safe. Really safe. She had no memory of the psychological drills or the planted questions whispered through the vents. She was back in school, laughing again, building friendships that had nothing to do with trauma or tests. Erin, despite everything, had pulled her out before it was too late. And that meant something. That meant everything. The press never got the full story, just whispers about an underground think tank dismantled due to ethical violations. Erin didn't need fame or headlines. What she wanted was deeper, quieter. Justice wasn't always a courtroom verdict. Sometimes, it was knowing you'd broken the cycle. She used the salvaged data she smuggled out to leak just enough to a trusted investigative journalist who had once lost her own brother to a similar shadowy institution. Together, they crafted a story that named no names but asked the right questions, ones the public couldn't ignore. How far would science go if it meant controlling human behavior? Who's watching when no one's watching the watchers? What price do we pay for the illusion of safety? The response was seismic. Social media exploded with hashtags like #EraseSubjects, #Psychological Warfare, and #WhoPullsTheStrings, trending on YouTube and TikTok in viral explainers and true crime breakdowns. Viewers across the US compared the scenario to real-life events, drawing lines between conspiracy and reality, pushing authorities to re-examine other closed cases that suddenly didn't feel so simple anymore. Erin's quiet war had become a national conversation. But even in that wave of attention, there were undercurrents she couldn't control. She received a handwritten note in her mailbox weeks after the article dropped. No postage stamp. Just her name on the front in elegant script. Inside, a single line: "You passed your phase. But your daughter has just begun hers." There was no signature. No trace of who delivered it. She stared at it for hours that night, debating whether to flee, to hide, to fight again. But then Lexi came in, hugged her without warning, and whispered, "I love you, Mom. I know you'd never let anything happen to me." And that was the moment Erin made her choice. Not to run, not to fear, but to prepare. Because if the shadows came again, she'd be ready. She wasn't just a survivor anymore. She was a storm waiting to hit back. The story ends not with a clean resolution, but with the kind of silence that leaves your mind spinning long after the screen fades to black. Erin didn't win in the traditional sense. There were no medals or triumphant music. But she tore a hole in something meant to be untouchable, and sometimes, That's enough to change the course of history. The final truth is this: we may never know who's really pulling the strings, what's hidden beneath government seals, or how deep the manipulation goes. But we know now to question it, to watch closer, to never assume the obvious is all there is. And maybe, just maybe, that single overlooked clue, the one that shattered the killer's overconfidence, was never just about solving one case. Maybe it was a message to all of us that no matter how carefully someone constructs a lie, truth always finds a crack. Now, ask yourself, if this could happen to her, how sure are you that it isn't already happening to someone you know? Stay awake, stay aware, and never ignore the feeling that something just doesn't add up.